would you say when China, for the last 20 years, has been taking hundreds of billions of dollars out of our country? So now it's time that we change things around. If they don't want to trade with us anymore, that would be fine with me.
Is President Trump betting his presidency and his reelection on his trade war with China? So far, the bet isn't paying off. More on Trump and on the upcoming Democratic debate in a minute. I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Also on our agenda, Mayor de Blasio didn't make the cut for next week's presidential debate, and he's near zero in most polls. We'll ask Times Metro political reporter Jeff Mays what's next for the mayor. And the Times' chief TV critic is out with an important new book. If you want to understand how the star of The Apprentice became president, you have to understand modern TV. James Poniewozik does, and he's standing by to talk about Audience of One. But we begin with presidential politics. Donald Trump had a brutal summer politically, racist tweets about the squad, attacking majority black Democrats in Baltimore, a rat-infested city, blaming a congressman for that, plus a widely criticized response to the mass shootings. But it's his trade war with China that may derail the Trump presidency and re-election. Another tariff hike this week, markets and business leaders rattled, farmers angry, consumer sentiment at the lowest in nearly 2 years, manufacturing activity down for the first time in 3 years. And will Trump pay the ultimate political price for all of this? And meanwhile, the next Democratic presidential debate just days away. What should we look for? And given Joe Biden's gaffes on the stump, questions about his losing a step, are the stakes especially high for him? Jonathan Ellis, senior politics editor at the Times, Clyde Haberman, a contributing writer for the Times. Let's start with the president. He tweeted that all American businesses should get out of China. He said he was the chosen one. He tried to buy Greenland. He congratulated Poland on being invaded by Germany. How much wackier can this White House get?
A lot. It just gets worse and worse. The Poland one, really, I had to laugh at. This man's a fool, congratulating a country that was invaded by the Nazis. There's no bottom that I see. I'm among the many who despised the guy, but figured, okay, he's going to become president. He will act a little bit more as we expect presidents to act. And instead, he's just racing to some new bottom that he keeps finding. I personally, and I'm not alone, I'm sure, in this, am convinced he's a sociopath who cannot see the world as existing outside of himself in any way, shape, or form. He fits almost every category of a textbook category of a sociopath. And to me, that's the bottom line in the election, not, the China tariffs, quite frankly. Obviously, presidents in the past have suffered when the economy's gone real bad. So far, he's been very fortunate, claiming that he created this great economy. Of course, most of it happened on Obama's watch. But we'll see. If things really head south, well, it didn't help George Bush the elder. Clearly, it didn't help Jimmy Carter. I don't think our economy is as bad as it was in either of those two situations. So he'll probably get lucky in that regard.
Jonathan, a lot of people said he was right to some extent on tariffs, at least on taking China on trade. But where's this going to go? I mean, the one thing he's really had going for him, as Clyde says, is the economy. Are people going to get so rattled that the economy may just blow up?
I think if you talk with Trump supporters, you may hear a lot of them really happy that he is going after China no matter the consequences. He may not really have an end game with the tariffs, and in our reporting, even some White House advisors say that they don't really see an end game right now. But there are certainly parts of Trump's base that appreciate the fact that he's taking the fight to China one way or another.
The problem, though, he has and had the last time around too, is he's got to get beyond that base. Maybe not all that far beyond, but he's got to get from 40 or so to 51%. How does he win those other people over?
Well, I think that's also why people are focused so closely on the economy, right? Because right now, the economy still holding up, still relatively strong, even though there are potentially some clouds on the horizon with certain economic indicators. But if it took a turn for the worse, then that's something that people can really feel in their daily lives, and that's really the risk for him. So that's why he's so focused on it, and everyone else is too.
And I don't think he has to get to 51 or even to 50.1%. He can be, once again, a minority winner if he wins in the right electoral places. He did it the last time, and in theory, he could do it again.
And arguably, the tariffs already are beginning to hurt some households as well.
Which is why Democrats should say, tariffs, my fanny, these are taxes.
Mm-hmm.
He is increasing your taxes. Every time you buy a pair of Chinese-made underwear that costs 23% more, it's because of Donald Trump. That's how I would
And he is handing an argument to the Democrats there, but there are also farmers who will say, hey, I am taking a hit with these tariffs, but I'm glad that he's doing it.
Okay.
As they say, you can't beat something with nothing. What about the Democrats? What should we look for in the upcoming debate?
I'll defer to John.
Sure. Well, this debate is going to be key because it's the first time that Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren are going to be on the same stage, standing right next to each other. And that's a matchup that voters haven't really been able to see for themselves yet. These are now the top two candidates in the polling. And it's going to be a very interesting contrast, and people are really going to be able to see that for themselves. They almost saw it this week when the candidates had the climate forum, but those were back-to-back interviews. And even then, you could see the contrasts between Biden's, mannerisms on the stage versus Warren. But to really see them standing next to each other, that's going to be big. And that may help a lot of voters start to make up their minds as we head into the fall campaign season, which is traditionally when a lot of voters really start to pay more attention.
Well, as we've said earlier, Labor Day is usually the start of a campaign, but it's usually Labor Day of the year of the election, not the year before. Are we starting all of this too early? Why should voters be making up their mind now? I mean, why the candidates, we haven't really focused on them all that much. How does someone know whether Biden is better than Warren? And should we even be thinking about this a year or 10 months or whatever in advance? On the basis of national polls, which are almost meaningless versus state polls, and the amount of money people are raising.
But it is what it is. It's been like this for a very long time now. This is not the first year that the campaign started, almost 2 years ahead of the first voting. And it's an insane system that the United States tolerates. It is insane to me that Iowa gets to decide gets the first shot at cutting the field. And then it goes to that other great representative state, New Hampshire, and then to South Carolina. So the first three deciders really are completely out of step with the rest of the country demographically in most respects. It makes no sense.
Jonathan, so how does that system work? We've got more debates, we're going to raise more money, we're going to take more polls, and then we're going to go into primaries in 3 states that are totally unrepresentative of the Democratic Party and the electorate in general. And what are we going to wind up with? This is sort of a rhetorical question.
Well, it is going to be interesting to see. I think there is some talk amongst the campaigns that, they wonder whether Iowa and New Hampshire, the first 2 states to vote next year, will really be as decisive as they have sometimes been. And it is true that, there have been some recent winners of Iowa, or people who really sort of beat expectations in Iowa, and then they didn't go on to win the nomination. That's certainly true of Bernie Sanders last time around. So the primary campaign isn't necessarily going to end, in February once Iowa and New Hampshire have their say. But of course, there are many people who argue that putting such emphasis on those 2 first states is ridiculous.
And that's certainly something to look forward to. Thanks to Jonathan Ellis and Clyde Haberman of the New York Times. And coming up next, flatlining in the polls, anemic fundraising. What's next for Bill de Blasio? Bill de Blasio can't even crack 1% in presidential polls. His fundraising weak, to say the least. He's more of a punchline than he is a powerhouse progressive. Meanwhile, the Post reports the mayor spent only 7 hours at City Hall in May, the month he announced his presidential bid. So why won't he follow the lead of fellow New Yorker, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, drop out, bow to the obvious? He's not going to be president. Jeff Mays is Metro political reporter for the New York Times. Jeffrey, Jimmy Walker, when he was mayor, said, imagine if he worked a full day at City Hall, what they'd have to pay him. What is Mayor de Blasio up to? Why won't he get the message? And why is it now October or bust?
Well, I think he's seeing that despite his various pushes, he's now had a town hall on CNN. He's been on Sean Hannity's show on Fox News. He's just not seeing a bounce in the polls. He's not seeing a bounce in support. He hasn't announced his numbers, but his last numbers, he raised a little over $1 million, which put him at the bottom of most the Democratic candidates. So I think, and he missed the September debate recently. So, yesterday, for the first time, he kind of hinted at the end of his campaign and said that if he doesn't make the October debates, it would be hard to see him continuing on. And he hasn't said that before. He's always been optimistic. He's talked about the sort of one magical social media moment that could catapult his campaign overnight, and that hasn't happened for him so far.
It hasn't happened, and yet he has acquitted himself pretty well in his public appearances, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think he has been back and forth between the early primary states and the city. He's still doing press conferences here. He did the first day of school was today, so he was out around the city, around the 5 boroughs. His argument about the amount of time, the 7 hours that he spent in City Hall in May, is that he's a chief executive and that he has to work from anywhere, and he does work from anywhere. The problem is, there are big issues going on in the city, gifted and talented test, traffic, housing, and, people feel like he's not necessarily paying the sort of attention they want him to pay to these issues.
What has he gained by running for president, if anything?
Well, I think after this, he is on the national talk shows talking about his proposals, sort of his brand of urban progressivism, what he's done here in terms of pre-K, universal pre-K and paid sick leave. So I think this elevates his profile in a way that he may not have been able, or that he feels he may not have been able to do here. The counter argument is that you're mayor of the New York City, the largest city in the country. If you're just here tackling these issues, doing a great job, then your profile is already raised.
Well, conversely, has he lost anything?
Well, I think the question now is going to be, what is he going to do once this campaign is over? There's been criticism that he's not paying as much attention to issues going around. For example, the other day there was an announcement from the city that the measles outbreak had been quelled. He did not appear at that announcement. He announced a hate crimes czar, a brand new office that's going to specifically tackle hate crimes. He wasn't at that announcement either. So there's a concern on whether the city actually has his full attention.
Is he bored?
I can't answer for the mayor, but I can say that, having been out in Iowa and New Hampshire, South Carolina with him, he is excited to be out there. He loves campaigning. He did very well at the first debate, did very well on his CNN town hall. He likes this. He likes pontificating. He likes talking about big ideas. So that's why it makes sense that, this presidential effort is definitely an effort to raise his profile, to make him someone who puts out those sort of big ideas.
He's got 2 more years, a little bit more than that, as mayor. Are we going to see any big ideas for New York City?
Well, I think there are any number of issues that can be tackled. As I said, you have the issue with traffic, with Uber, congestion. congestion pricing is coming. Recently, a panel that he created issued recommendations regarding the city's gifted and talented program. That's a massive issue affecting parents. I asked him about that yesterday, and he said that he will have some sort of solution before the end of his term. So that's not his problem. There are a myriad of issues facing him when he finishes his presidential campaign.
And is he going to get involved, or is he going to be a lame duck? Where does he go from here?
Well, I think after this campaign, and the criticism that he's taken for being an absentee mayor, it would seem that he would have to try to finish strong. He would have to tackle an issue, grab an issue, have another signature accomplishment. If he wants to remain as this sort of voice of the Progressive Democratic Party after his term is over in 2 years, he's going to have at least a few more accomplishments to do that before his term is over.
Any idea what that could be? He's has to wrestle with closing Rikers Island, which is still problematic. The gifted and talented programs in the school. Whatever he does, he's bound to attract criticism.
Right. Those are two major issues. Those are two hot button issues right now. They're both waiting for the mayor to weigh in on. And I think advocates now are moving beyond closing Rikers. They don't want new jails. They had a hearing recently, and that's a big point. So, people want the mayor to weigh in. And as I said, there's no shortage of issues here that he could tackle if he chooses to do so.
Indeed. Thanks to Jeff Mays of the New York Times. Coming up next, the world of 3-network television exploded in a world of hundreds of cable channels. Now a reality TV star is president. The Times' James Poniewozik connects the dots in a new book. He's on deck. Way back when we had only 3 TV networks, and in a sense that was a unifying cultural experience. Now, hundreds of cable channels. They've helped splinter America into segments. Anti-heroes like Tony Soprano, Don Draper are the stars. So should we be surprised that a gossip column anti-hero and reality TV star named Donald Trump used TV brilliantly to become president? Probably not. The Times' chief TV critic, James Poniewozik, puts it all in perspective in a major new book, Audience of One, Donald Trump, Television, and the Fracturing of America. Now, you start this book by pointing out that Rona Barrett in 1980 asked Donald Trump if he wanted to be president. He said, "No way, because television has ruined the process." What happened since then, James?
Read the book. That's sort of, honestly, that is sort of the story of the book. Yeah, he said at the time, television favors, nice guy with a big smile, and somebody who is more sort of coarse and combative couldn't necessarily win an election like that. And the thing is, he was right at the time. And 36 years later, he got elected president as a very different sort of candidate who, ran a very sharp-elbowed election in a very polarized media environment. Part of that is that American politics has changed in ways that many people have examined. But a big factor in that is that America's popular culture, and particularly television, has changed from the sort of 3-network monoculture of the 20th century to the niche bubble internet 1,000-channel era that we live in today. So this book is both the story of how we got Trump and how television helped get us there.
How did it help us get there? If we're so fragmented, then how many people could be watching him as opposed to 1,000 other candidates?
A fragmented media environment allows a different kind of character and a different kind of programming to thrive, and that is true if you're talking about entertainment television, where, say in HBO, which had different business imperatives and could thrive with smaller audiences of subscribers, they could create great programming like The Sopranos with a monstrous villainous character, but charismatic and entertaining character like Tony Soprano, who could not have, you couldn't have put Tony Soprano on the air in 1950, 1970. And likewise, in a TV environment where you have reality TV shows that, celebrate nasty judges and, rude, obnoxious people stopping being polite and starting being real. And when you have, outlets like Fox News that serve, potent niches, you can have a character like the, outspoken character that Donald Trump became through The Apprentice, through Fox News, become prominent and develop a following.
Does Trump dominate the media, or is the media, particularly Fox, setting the agenda for the White House?
It is kind of a two-way tango. I mean, obviously, Trump surfed to where he is through television. I mean, if he were just a New York real estate developer with no media presence, he wouldn't be president now. He wouldn't be close to that. So certainly his instinct for knowing what pleases a camera got him, everything that he's renowned for. Now that he's president, he is very much controlled by kind of a user of the same media drug that he pushes. And you see that in, today's news cycle, where, avid news watcher Donald Trump gets up, starts watching Fox and Friends, gets mad about something, tweets about it. That becomes the news. He sees the news. He tweets back at the news, and it's not only sort of controlling the media ecosystem that we live in and consume, but it's setting the news agenda for the government and the country and the world.
Does he really watch TV 8 hours a day?
I've read it in the New York Times.
Must be true.
Yeah, he is. As I got to say, as a TV critic, my hat is off to him for finding the time. And
does he believe everything he sees on TV? Is that his definition of reality TV?
For somebody who attacks the fake news media, he seems to take everything that he sees extremely to heart and at face value. So even as he attacks it, he certainly is he's impressionable by what he sees enough to react.
And tell me, is the Gorilla Channel story really true?
The Gorilla Channel is not really true in the sense that there was not actually a closed circuit channel of fighting guerrillas created for Donald Trump at the White House.
What a relief!
It's just what the news has become.
Yeah, it could be though.
Yeah,
it's not totally implausible.
Yeah, I mean, what you do have is a media environment in which people know that the President of the United States is heavily influenced by television and watching all the time and makes decisions based on what he sees on television. So people put themselves inside his TV, get themselves booked onto Fox News to send messages to him, say, bomb Syria, don't bomb Syria, do this at the border, do that at the border. Metaphorically, the Gorilla Channel is real, and we all live in it, whether we like it or not.
And when do we reach a point where this show gets canceled, where people have had enough of it?
I mean, that's up to the rest of America. If you see the history of The Apprentice, you could take 2 lessons from that. Number one, it was a show that was a huge ratings hit on NBC for one season, its first season. And then it sort of overexposed Donald Trump and his catchphrase, "You're fired," and he became a more and more extreme version of himself, and its ratings quickly fell off. On the other hand, it stayed on NBC for 14 seasons. So,
James Poniewozik, the book is Audience of One, and I'll add my thoughts next on Coda. If you asked anyone last Monday for directions to the Labor Day parade, you would have been directed to the West Indian Carnival in Brooklyn. Labor Day began in New York in 1882, but organized labor stopped holding parades on Labor Day years ago because nobody came. Why traipse to Fifth Avenue for a shrinking show of solidarity on your day off? Instead, Labor Day is being celebrated again on the following Saturday. Until 1981, 13 years had elapsed without any Labor Day parade at all. When the unions decided to revive the annual march, it took the once vaunted Central Labor Council 2 months to get a police department permit. In 1994, the parade was canceled for lack of interest. 2 years later, it was shifted to preserve the three-day weekend. In the mid-1980s, more than 1 in 4 private sector employees in the city were unionized. Today, barely 1 in 6 are. Their share in construction and factory jobs barely register in a city university survey. 2019 is the 125th anniversary of when Congress declared Labor Day a national holiday. The first parade in New York was led by the brewery workers, the clothing cutters, and the printers. While the city's public sector unions still have clout, of course. But today we've got non-unionized craft microbrewers, showrooms displaying imported fashions, and the taxpayer-funded official guide, which is mailed to hundreds of thousands of registered voters. It's printed in Pennsylvania in a non-union shop. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.